Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fifth and final night of the Allen Family Residency at Texas Tech and virtually wherever you are. Tonight, Terry Allen, Stories, Pictures, and Songs. A reminder, this presentation is brought to you by the Terry and Joe Harvey Allen Center for Creative Studies. Make sure that you have a question throughout the conversation to hit the Q&A button and put your question in there or put it in the chat. And Terry will be around after the talk to answer any questions you might have. Hey everyone out there, thank you for joining us. With us now is Terry Allen. Terry, thank you so much for taking time out to spend some time with our students here at Texas Tech and impart some wisdom.
My pleasure. I don't know about that second part, but my pleasure.
And I think that's a good place to start is thinking of the fact that, you know, our audience here is made up of a lot of students who are art students, music students, and who are in a position right now where they're at school trying to figure out maybe who they are and what they want to create. And so if I could take you back to that time in your life, what was art school like to you, and what were some of the observations that helped you craft or some things that you saw as a student that would be helpful for them to hear?
Well, I grew up in Lubbock, and I did not do well in high school, especially. And I went one semester at Texas Tech where I also did not do very well. But I had two classes that I really liked. One was a writing class, one was a drawing class. And the drawing class, kind of at the end of the semester, I remember asking the teacher, who was Paul Hanna, who was teaching the class, I asked him if there was a school that was like his class. And he told me about Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, where he had gone for a couple of years. And I pretty much had my application in the mail that afternoon because I was ready to make a big change in my life, and I didn't know exactly what it meant, but that gave me a target. And so I applied to the school and was put on probation at first, and I had to take a drawing class, and I worked. I worked two jobs, plus I had the one night I had off, took this drawing class. But the school was a total revelation to me. It was the first time I had encountered people my age, peers, that were deadly serious about making a painting or making a picture, making an object, whatever. But it was like for real. It wasn't hobby time. All of these people were committed, and I had never experienced like a large group of people with that kind of energy. And so that had a huge effect on me, I think. And then the school itself, the fact that it was in LA in the 60s was an incredible time to be there. The city itself was as much a school as the school was. But I think it was also a time when, when all of the isms were collapsing. And so you had a variety of visual artists, but dancers, writers, poets, architects, and musicians that were all kind of commingling and making things and working on things together. And I think that had a big impact on me because all of a sudden there were no rules. But at the same time, there was a tremendous sense of responsibility to what you did. So you had those two things playing off of one another. But also to kind of get through it, there were so many guests that came in, incredible artists from all areas of making things. And I think that was a huge inspiration to be around these actual working artists. And then there were younger artists who were just starting to show in Los Angeles, who like Ed Ruscha and Robert Irwin, Larry Bell, people like that had been to Chenard and were kind of came back and were very encouraging, came to classes and just talked to students and spent time. So there was a community, in a sense, of making that was very important in my life at that time.
Yeah, and I think, looking at your work, you think about the fact of how multidisciplinary it is and how multi-platform and all of these different things, even into today, embracing the different aspects of video and all of those things that are so incredible. It sounds like that really all stems from that experience in college. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that go into that, because I think a lot of times students come in and they want to be a painter or an architect. So to have that formidable experience where it was like, you don't have to be any one thing, that really comes through, I think, in your career and body of work.
Yeah, I think it kind of occurred to me early on for me that to make something was, it's like there were no rules. Like instead of the art store, I know a lot of people got their materials at the dump or at the hardware store or the stationery store. So all of those kind of availabilities had opened up. There was everything was accessible. So consequently, anything you wanted to do was a possibility. And also the Vietnam War was booming at the time, and music was a huge, factor that was always behind everything. And it was so that had a big impact on me. And I know there was a student lounge where they had a piano, and that's where I did some of the very first time I ever played music in front of people, other than when I was in high school and got in trouble or something.
What was some of the first, so you're in school, what were some of the first successes you had, or some of the first things that helped you realize you were either on the right path or that you were going to be able, I think always in the arts, it's hard to know if you're always going to be able to make it, but what were some of those first formidable pieces or commissions that you were able to receive that helped push you along the path of art and your work?
Well, I think it was just the environment I was in. I wasn't around anybody that wanted to be a teacher, that wanted to be anything other than going, as soon as they got out of school, get a studio and start working. And I very much had that same kind of feeling. Though I remember the day that I got my diploma, I walked out of there looking at this paper. I had no money. My piano had just been stolen out of my car. So I had to buy another one on credit because I was playing in a band. And I looked at this and I said, this isn't even really worth toilet paper. And in a sense, as far as making art, it wasn't, it wasn't about that. And I think the first year out of school is like it terminates a lot of ambitions. A lot of people come up against the reality of the world. And school, in a sense, it's a haven. It's like a mother. And because you have access to equipment, you have space to work, you have friends that, have common interests and whatever. Then all of a sudden, boom, that umbilical cord's over. And you're out in the world and you have to figure out how to get your own studio, how to get your own materials, how to just eat, make a living. And that's why I think somewhere in there, I made the decision that it was not a career, it was a choice of how I was going to live my life. And that didn't discount any of the anxieties or stresses of living. I was in the same situation after Buck and Bale were born. Joe Harvey and I had, 2 kids. We had no money. We were in the middle of LA. But a city is a great place if you're broke. At least you can odd job it. You can find hauling stuff or working in a warehouse for 2 days, driving a truck or whatever. But you can kind of patronize yourself, which if you're an artist, you have to do that. You cannot, I think you can want everything. You can, and probably maybe should, but if you expect it, you're a moron. It doesn't happen that way.
And how do you, so I love that advice. I think that's fantastic. That it's just, you have to be driven. You have to go for it and just make it part of you. But as that artist who's just got out of school, who might not necessarily have a name for themselves, what are some of the first, or what were, in your experience, some of the first steps to maybe getting shown in a gallery or getting a commission or getting people to actually recognize you? Because once you have a name and a network, it does make it easier to get it. But how do you start?
Yeah, I've the year after I got out of Chenard, I got on the U.S. Poverty Program in Watts, because they just had the Watts riots, and they had opened up a program because all of these teachers, mostly white teachers, had quit, and so they opened up a program to bring in young people. That if you had the grade points, you had a degree, and you had could pass this test that they gave you, then they gave you a 2-week indoctrination kind of course, and then you were suddenly in a school with 40 kids, and that's kind of what I found myself in. And that year, which I won't totally go into, but that year was another real education for me in my life. And but while I was doing that, I was frustrated because I wanted to do my lesson plans for the grade school, for school, but at the same time I was very frustrated because I wasn't working. And so I started this body of work, and I had no idea what I was going to do. So I just, for the hell of it, I've said, okay, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to illustrate the Bible. And that's how I started. I made this drawing, and I remember it was Superman destroys Babylon, or something like that, and it was a kind of a cartoonish type drawing, and it set off this body of work, which had nothing to do with the Bible after that first drawing, but I was suddenly catapulted into making something that was my own and looking for my own voice. And kind of after I quit teaching, after that year was up, Bucka was born, and I took these drawings around, and I decided to take them to the galleries that I thought were the very best galleries in Los Angeles, that showed the artists that I liked the most. And I didn't want to waste any time dealing with somebody I didn't really care about what they were doing. And I was very fortunate because I went to a dealer named Nick Wilder. Nick Wilder had me lay my drawings out, looked at them and said, I like these. I don't want to show them, but I'll tell you who should show, where you should go, who you should talk to, and gave me a little, seminar for about 2 hours, and which, I'm very grateful for that. And then one thing he said, though, he said, don't go talk to Irving Blum. He won't care. He won't do any of, he won't like this work. And I walked out of Nick's across the street to Irving's. And in those days, you could just, kind of walk in and say, look, I have some work I'd like to show, no appointments or anything. Now there's so many layers between you and getting to talk to somebody sometimes, But at that, his secretary said, go in and take your work. And again, I walked in, Irving was on the phone, and he just kind of did the same thing Nick did, lay him out on the floor, and I laid him out on the floor. He got off the phone, got up, walked kind of around, looked at each drawing, never said a word, went to the phone, called the museum and said, there's a guy here you've got to give a show to. And so my first show was at the Pasadena Art Museum.
Wow.
And crammed in this little bitty room, I had about 30 drawings that were just crammed, salon style, side by side, all the way to the ceiling. But it was also, in the other part of the museum was a Joseph Cornell's show. So, and then a dealer from San Francisco saw that, asked me to do a show up in San Francisco, and that's kind of how it started. So, but I think every artist has a different story there, and also it's relative to the time that it happened, and just the dice rolling, I think, for you.
Yeah, it's really evolved since then. Like you said, the layers of bureaucracy or access, the gatekeepers has increased, but it doesn't stop someone from just trying to get out there and get shown and taking some chances. I mean, there's a lot of, you put your ego out there when you take and show your work, but you got to be willing also to have someone say, like, that's not for me, but not then decide you can't be an artist. You just need to find another venue or another opportunity.
Yeah, I really do think you have to, I don't think you can I don't think you can make yourself be an artist by doing what they tell you in schools or what you into. I think it is some kind of deep personal necessity, that you have that makes you do it, whatever the circumstances of your life. But I think that's always something inside you that's making you want to make something. Yeah. And
which that's a great segue into process. I think that's a great, interesting way to then think about process. For you, I mean, because you work in so many disciplines, where does it start? And is it just an idea you have and you jot something down? Does it come from words? Talking to you over the years, I know that you might just see something and it sparks an idea, but how do you nourish that to a complete project?
Yeah. Well, for me, it happens different ways. So, I can be working on a song, and the next thing I'll know, I'll have some images, and I always have notebooks near me, and I always put kind of that idea of moving something out of your head or in your whatever onto a paper so you can look at it has been critical to me from the time really when I was in high school. So I've always kept notebooks and journals and things and, documented or written things down. But that's kind of the heart, I think, of where things begin for me. But back to, I can be working on a song and maybe one lyric might kick an image off. I'll go draw the image, and the next thing I know, I'm writing maybe some kind of a text for it. Go back, another song, maybe that text enters that, but it builds, and it's not like anything I'm really consciously pushing. It's like something that kind of begins to happen out of itself. And I think as an artist, you look for, it's like a writer, you look for a voice in whatever the idea is, or curiosity you have. You start looking for a voice, and then if you find that voice, then you try to get it to be as true to what the idea is as you can. And that's a basic, kind of, I think, attitude that I usually go at it.
Yeah.
So, it's usually a very mysterious process to me. It's like, if I'm encountering something that I'm very suddenly familiar with, I lose interest in it. As long as it has some edge of mystery and kind of takes you into an unknown place that you haven't thought about or been to before in your head, then that is very attractive to me, because I think that's where work happens. That's where it becomes art, or whatever it's going to be. And I also think that there's a point where that's very critical, where you get rid of yourself. where you just leave yourself and it becomes about the thing you're making, not about you making it. And I think that's an important element in the work, you know.
Yeah. Is there a point? You've made hundreds of pieces over the years, but then there's also probably a lot that have been conceptualized, gotten to a point, and then either abandoned or left behind. Is there a moment where you know, okay, this is a dead end? How do you determine what ideas are worth pushing through, even though they might be difficult, and what ideas are dead in their tracks? Or can you know that?
Well, it's a funny thing because, you know, I'm not sure I think in terms of dead ends, you know, but I know I've had the situation where I would do a body of work and there would be one drawing or one piece that was a bastard. It was like somehow it did not work with these, or even I don't like it, but I don't like it in a way that makes me extremely curious about it, you know. And so I always show those pieces. I've even thought about at times, well, actually I've shown a couple of times a bastard show.
I love that.
But I think it goes back to, it's telling you something that, you know, it's telling you something that's, in my case, it's something that down the line is going to happen. You know, like I've looked back in notebooks and seen little notations and little drawings and whatever that I thought I had abandoned. And when I go back and look at them, I'm right in the middle of some huge piece that came right out of that idea that I wasn't even aware of, you know. And so I think you do circle back to yourself, you know. It's like song lyrics, you know, you can work a long time thinking that you're writing several songs or whatever, and then you have one revelation that these parts of different songs put together are really one song, and that's what you've been working. Or vice versa, you know, you've been forcing one song, but it's actually two or three of them maybe that are in there. Yeah. So I think you always have to, you know, feel open to that. Of what's going to happen with that, you know. And that's why those areas of turmoil and when you kind of don't know which direction you're going and you're floundering around, to me are very important critical areas. And, you know, because something's always happening in there. Something's getting ready to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a reason you're feeling all the things that you're feeling about where you're at with the work.
Yeah, I think so. And there's always a point too where the work, like if you kind of, you know, throw yourself into that work, it talks to you. It starts telling you certain things about itself. And so it kind of takes care of itself. It's like style to me. It's like voice or style. I never was interested in having a style because I always thought the idea of whatever you're approaching, whatever you're making, the style takes care of itself if you're trying to be true to the voice of it. You know?
Yeah. Juarez is an interesting piece along talking about this conversation about process and concept, because that started as a series of drawings, right? And then became music.
They really came together. I think the first song that I wrote was Cortez Sail. And I was working on a drawing called Cortez Sail. And then I did a song called Border Palace, and I did a drawing, Border Palace. And it kind of springboarded into the series. But I never knew where that was going. I was kind of following that piece. And it was the first time I encountered in my own work real characters. But the characters were not human. They were like climates or conditions, you know, that were kind of in building with and against one another until suddenly it became this body of work, you know, and it became a story and became an album, became a theater piece, a number of installations, but it all came out of just kind of this, this following it,
Yeah.
And at one point I did write down this very simple little story of what was happening, which was kind of became the outline or in a sense, the heart of the whole piece,
Is there any difference in the musical side of it compared to like the fine art side or the physical art side, to where is your musical process different, or does it all just sort of come from those same ideas that you've said here, that it's just about following it? Because I imagine, as far as like the formal writing of lyrics and music, that there's a little more concrete things that have to go into that. But I don't know, I'm not a musician, compared to like the abstract nature of what you can create as a painting or a sculpture. Is there a difference?
Well, I don't think of it as a difference. I know that sometimes when I'm drawing, it's very tedious, or when I'm making a piece, I'll go sit at a piano and unload.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so there's that immediacy of music in my studio. The immediacy of making a song, or just tactily. Tactile. Touch.
Yeah. There's a release to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but also I think that I've never thought that one had a precedence over the other. I never thought that music was more important or lend more to a piece, or making a picture or an image did. To me, there are all these vehicles to get at what you're trying to deal with. And I always thought of Juarez as kind of music on one side, visual on the other, neither one of them illustrating the other. And what it's about is kind of you passing down the middle of it with all of that happening,
Yeah.
But I mean, songwriting too. It's just like anything else, It can come in 1 minute, a song, or it can come in 10 years. Like there were songs in Juarez. Juarez was about a 5-year project before it kind of, the first time I showed it, the first time I showed the whole body of work together. One of the issues that I had was showing it piecemeal as I was making it, because just, out of, practicality, I had to try to sell some work and make a living.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I've said this 1,000 times, just a little country waltz or a big elevated sculpture in the middle of the Louvre. I don't think one is more important than the other.
Absolutely. What about the nature of, so if you're sitting down and you're conceptualizing a drawing, which becomes a painting, or which becomes a series of work, and then when you're conceptualizing a song, which becomes lyrics and music, at some point in the music side of things, you generally are going to let collaborators in, and it becomes more than just you. What is that process like for you? And maybe what's the difference between being able to, from concept to final piece, have full control, but then on the music side and even the theater side, being able to open up and let collaborators in to help you flesh out and finish a piece?
Yeah, it just seems like a natural thing to me, especially after I did Lubbock on Everything. Juarez was pretty much solo and pretty much internal. How it came about, the whole aspect of it, even though it kind of elevated itself over. But then I came to Lubbock and did Lubbock on Everything, which was just about songs. And it was the first time I had really worked with musicians. And I was fortunate enough to, fall in with the group of people that were there at that time. And so I had an incredible good experience with it. And I just saw it as something that enhanced, another tool that you have to work with, but Joe Harvey, from, early on when I some of these pieces began to develop into theater, she was kind of a perfect target for me because I lived with her, and she's an incredible actor. So, and she was just kind of getting going then too. So, we were collaborating. It's like the band, I think, the Panhandle Mystery Band, it's like we were collaborating, but at the same time, we were all learning individually of how to collaborate and what that meant. So it was learning as well as doing at the same time. And I think that's always the case, But it's real interesting. Like Richard Bowden has been in every theater piece I've done, and Joe Harvey, so literally, I mean, Joe Harvey and I were talking about it last night that like he was saying the hardest things he ever did were those theater pieces, because it's so demanding as far as your timing when you come in, and what happens is so dependent upon each thing that happens before is going to happen after, So, but yeah, the collaboration, and then like my last record came about as kind of a collaborative thing. A lot of the songs are songs that I wrote separately, but the record is a real collaboration in a way that I haven't worked before. And one thing I think I talked to you about with the archives and all of the reissues of records, and then I had a big show, a retrospective at my gallery. It's like crawling down memory lane until I was exhausted with myself and my past, and I was just dying to make something new, And so I ended up getting this commission that I'm working on in my studio that's going to take me quite a while to kind of complete. But also at the same time started dealing with these songs and the going to Marfa and collaborating with all these musicians and doing Moby Dick.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the virus gave a big judo chop to the club. it did that to everybody.
Yes. It has knocked the earth off its axis for all of us. So I'm sure that's a difficult thing. You talk about collaborators and collaboration. And then you sort of alluded there and talked about how in your whole life you have had a very collaborative relationship, obviously with your wife Jo Harvey, with your boys Buck and Dale, but then with some really great friends that are not just collaborators but also great friends. I've always been fascinated by the fact that you have had these deep personal relationships with your collaborators for as long as you have. Not that it's a secret. I mean, a lot of people have that, but how do you maintain that to be able to create and nurture and continue to not only just have friendships, but also getting the band back together? And what is that like? How do you foster that?
For me, it's just a trust, It's like, and I think a lot of times it starts with work. It starts with making something. And in case of nearly all of my really close friends, it came out of a working kind of environment where we were doing something together, and you learn to trust one another when you're making music or when you're making a piece or whatever you're doing, and I think that becomes kind of the the heart of the whole issue. And but yeah, I've been really fortunate that way. I mean, I look back on on just kind of all of the things that I've been lucky enough to be involved with, all of the people that we've crossed tracks with, and it's just focus kind of, it seems like, has always been about making things or around making things, whether it's a song or whatever. So I know one of my closest friends is Al Ruppersberg, who's an artist that I met in line at Chenard, and we became friends just as students, struggling and a lot of my friends are kind of date back from those days. There's a lot of casualties down the line too, but it's been a pretty rich life, and it's rich because of what you're talking about, those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you take, so, one of the things I know that students deal with early on, especially, is the ability to take criticism in a healthy way, or input. We don't even have to call it criticism, maybe just input. You have a whole career and a body of work, but I imagine there are still places where you take input from trusted friends and collaborators across the spectrum. How do you balance that just within yourself when you have an idea for something, but then maybe you get input from someone else? How do you decide what's relevant and can help, and what should just kind of be cast aside as that's not what I'm going for?
Well, what pops into my head is every time it's different. Every time it's brand new. I often think that, God, I'm 77 years old and I've done all of this for a really long time, and I should have it down. I should know how to do it, and I don't know any more about it now than maybe less than I it, And I think that's kind of the nature of making art. Every time you confront a blank sheet of paper or a blank canvas or a blank whatever, you're confronting the history of your habits, and so you're having to go through this kind of history of bullshit to get to where where you can start again. And when you get there, to me, and it's always exhilarating, and it's always frightening, but it's always exhilarating, and it's the same creature you're facing that you faced when you were 18 years old, 20 years old, 50 years old, whatever, and the same thing. And I remember when I was in school, I had a teacher, an artist named Emerson Wolfer, who was a wonderful abstract expressionist painter, kind of an old second generation abstract, but beautiful painter. And Emerson was probably, mid 40s at the time, but he seemed like an old man to me, And but he was a great teacher because he didn't tell you what you should do. He just let you work. And when he looked at the work, he wouldn't even say anything. He would just kind of make these wild gestures, and then walk away, So you were always kind of bewildered with it. But I remember going to lunch with him, and a bunch of students and him, and he was saying, that very thing, it is so strange to me when I start painting. I painted so much, but each time it's such a different fear and a different exhilaration, and it was like you realize he went through the exact same thing you were going through as a student, even, And I think that's kind of the common bond of making work that artists have, whatever art whatever you're doing, music or whatever.
Yeah. That's incredible. I love that advice too. Of it's reassuring, I think, I'm sure, for our students to hear that even at 77, with all of the work you've done, that it is like doing it again for the first time and coming up against those habits, because I'm sure there's walls being run into all the time that you have to overcome personally, and just, the structures of being a professional artist or getting art into the world professionally.
Right. But also, people make art in all different kinds of ways. And, as many different ways as there are people, I suppose, that make it. And so there can be an artist that's very valid who only makes art out of their habits, that's their subject, is their habits. And they get some exhilaration or whatever out of that. So again, there's really no rules. It's just what your choices that you make are your responsibility. but there's no rules where you exert that responsibility,
How do you keep up with, things constantly change? Obviously, I think there's some parallels and some connections here. You coming of age as an artist in the 60s, which was a very political time, which was a time of turmoil culturally in our country. And you had the Vietnam War. I think this generation has some very similar things going on around them right now. We're in a very tumultuous time politically, and there is a lot of reckoning going on in our country. Do you see that parallel? And then also, what advice might you give to students in voicing those types of things into their art? It's not for everyone. I'm sure it's not affecting everyone as far as what they want to create and how they want to express that. But I know the Vietnam War has been something that's come up throughout your work through many, many years. How do you address the political?
Well, in my case, I was invited to Thailand to write the music for a German film about Amerasian children that had been left Vietnam and gone to Thailand and were in orphanages and whatever. This film was called Amerasia. And it was, I guess it was 1981, 82 that I spent a month in Thailand. But we interviewed all of these veterans who were U.S. expatriates who had married Thai or Vietnamese women and had settled in Thailand because they didn't want to bring their wives and families to America, which they thought was so violent at the time. But I think what it did, I also had a cousin who did 3 tours in Vietnam, ended up deserting, getting a general discharge, and the next 20 years of his life slowly dying until it killed him. The war killed him as much as it killed anybody that stepped on a mine. I had another very good friend who was in our wedding who was killed in '65. But I never made the connection that these personal things that were happening were also global, And it wasn't until I was invited to do this soundtrack for this film that it dawned on me that the things that were happening to these families and people down the line, individually, whatever, was also happening on a global scale. And I started making work that kind of talking about that and addressing that. And I ended up off and on over a period of 10 years working on euthanasia, this body of work that dealt specifically with the aftermath of the Vietnam War, not the war, because I didn't go to the war. But I didn't go to, I say I didn't go to the war, but in a sense, the whole culture went to the war. It's just like kids now, some kids 20 years old haven't known anything. Their country's been at war ever since they were born. Yeah. And I think that's a funny thing about being, not funny, but it's an aspect of being an American, is that there's always seems to be a war.
Yeah.
In some place or another, there's always something going on like that, and some conflict. So, but yeah, I never felt overtly political. But I think that because of my concerns with my work, those issues immediately came up and were there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One thing you touched on there, which I think is fascinating too, is it sounds like too it was somewhat of a dialogue with yourself. You said you didn't really realize that stuff was there under the surface, but then that sort of became an awakening, and it was a dialogue that you were trying.
Yeah, there's so many, just like images. I remember when I was a kid, Disney did their first kind of true life adventure movies. And I remember there was one on Yellowstone Park, and there was a series of maulings that summer that movie came out, because little kids would run out of the car at the park and go pet the cuddly bears, and the bears would kill them or eat them or maul them, and years later, when I was working on this body of work, that became a pretty powerful metaphor to me, kind of what happened to my generation, as far as being seduced into these wars and whatever. So there was a lot of Disney images that I ended up using throughout the body of work. So but that's one example of where that came from.
Yeah. And I think too, it's interesting too, because now, as we're talking about this idea and I'm thinking about a lot of your work and some of the things you've said, there's a constant sort of dialogue within you, which comes out in the work, confronting the past and your roots and all of those experiences, which, is there a way to touch into that, or does it just sort of come out naturally because of who you are and the experiences you have?
Well, I spent a lot of time denying where I came from when I was in LA, when I was in school, and even up until I went back to Lubbock and recorded Lubbock on Everything. But I think one thing that I learned is that where you come from is always vital. It's vital if you run as far away as you can from it, if you go back into it head on, but whatever, it's there. And if you're an artist, I think it's a place to look, because it's where you are, whoever you are. And so I kind of came to peace with that, and when I did that Lubbock record. But it was that circle again. To me, it was like making some kind of full circle back into yourself, all different,
Yeah.
Which I think your life is a series of those kind of loops. But yeah, I know a lot of people are chomping at the bit to get out of where their circumstances, and I totally understand that. And I think wherever you are, you have to go somewhere else. You have to participate in the world and go out and see. It's hard to do when you're, in quarantine, but I still think that's a crucial thing of us as humans to find out about what other people in the world are dealing with.
Absolutely. Another thing that we've touched on here, but not enough, I feel like, is notebooks. You had talked about the fact that you constantly keep notebooks around you, and students may think, oh, he's got a notepad here or there. You have a lifetime worth of notebooks that you've kept all of those ideas in. And of course, they have access to those at the archive here at Texas Tech, the Allen Archive. They can get in there and look through those. But one, you kind of talked about it already, about the importance of being able to do that. But also, how do you just keep track of all of those, and how do you know what's in each? And then what was the importance to holding on to so many of those? I know you have them going back as far as high school, grade school. I mean, you've kept all of those. What?
I don't know. I don't know why I would be arrogant enough to think they're, but Joe Harvey and I both have kept notebooks. One of the things I see them kind of in the same situation as letters. Like we have thousands of letters from friends, artists, over the years, because that's what we did. When people didn't have any money, they could afford a stamp, because you couldn't afford a phone call. A long distance call was too much money, and so people wrote long letters to each other. And early on, I realized how beautiful some of these letters were and how important kind of they were of a time. And in a way, I think my notebooks just kind of trailed along with them. But they're also, they're kind of a living history that I can go delve into and find things. If I want to go back and look, and periodically I did, but I'm still much more interested kind of in what's going on, but at the time, but they're kind of a history of ideas and the history of you know, frustrations and just a history, you know.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to me that is also incredibly relieving, or just something that just drops everything down, all of the pressure points or whatever of a day, just to write and make a mark, and whatever, you know, that's something that kind of puts things back into a perspective that I can deal with.
Yeah.
So it's become important to me that way. I don't know, you know, it's like Joe Harvey and I've written tons of letters to each other. And I think we told Tech, you know, they couldn't be open for 1,000 years.
The personal letters.
So there are things that are personal too. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
I also have, you know, I can kind of trace, like I'm, you know, there's been some interest in doing a book on my piece, Go Ship Rodez, which is, you know, about a 4-year project. Most of my projects are long. They take 4, 5, 6 years to kind of reach some culmination. But Go Ship, I've still got all of the notebooks, but I can trace kind of where I first got interested when I first started thinking, and it's just helpful for me to do that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing another interesting thing is you've always done a really great job of incorporating, I don't know the best way to say this, but like, for instance, the installation right now that is multi-platform, it's video, audio, it's physical. How do you keep up with new technology and incorporated that into work? Not that there's any groundbreaking technology with it, but just that idea that over the years from the 1960s to now, so much has changed as far as the technology, the process of making art. How do you keep on top of that and then work to incorporate that into the work?
Well, I think the times kind of dictated. I mean, if you're working, like I just did this piece for Ghost Ship, there's kind of a video puppet where there's the chest and the torso is a video, the head's a video, hands are videos, the feet, you know, and it's the whole thing is a face. It's Joe Harvey's face speaking this narrative, but. To take one image of a face and put it on in a screen, and then break it up to the forehead, I think, is the face, the hands are the sides of the eyes, you know, each of the eyes. So it breaks up the face into a body, and like the feet are one side is one foot, one side is the other foot. The nose is a torso. You know, so it's and all of them are working at once, and there's a guy here named David Aubrey who's a fantastic video person, and that's what, you know, I think when you get an idea, and I early on had the idea of somehow making this puppet. You know, there are people that do that, and so I've worked with David before, and. You know, he kind of put the thing together, and we edited it and worked on it. So I think there's always access out there. You know, there's so many people that are good at doing that. Like me trying to learn to do that would be reinventing the wheel, you know. And but that's what's come along with this incredible technical excess. There's also an excess of expertise. So, you know, you can find people to do that. It's like what's going on with the virus. You know, people, you know, there are no venues anymore. Artists, the galleries are closed, the theaters are closed, the clubs are closed. So people have had to reinvent how they present what they do, and are in the process of doing it right now. And I have nothing but faith in artists as far as figuring out a way. They're going to figure out a way to do it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that role of art as well, just in our society and culture, and what artists do. As far as I know, it's not quite a perfect segue, but also I know that as far as just making a difference in the things around you, not necessarily through your art, but through your influence. You and Joe Harvey are working on a project for New Mexico kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so giving
Yeah.
too is a part of that.
Yeah, we're just doing a big online concert called Food for Love, where I'm you know, both of us are asking people, friends of ours and musicians that we know, to do a song, and
Yeah.
we're going to present it and try to raise some money for food banks in New Mexico, which are desperate right now with all of that. You know,
Everything going on with the virus. How?
They've always been desperate.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Especially in New Mexico, it's a tough. I grew up there, as you know, and it's a tough place. It's always been behind on things like that. So that's great that y'all are doing that. And just since we're on the subject of sort of the virus and the things going on right now, as an artist being cooped up in your studio, do you feel? I've heard two schools of thought. I've heard people who say it's the worst thing ever and I can't do it, and then others who have really flourished in this time. How is it for you, and how have you been able to maintain it?
Yeah, I'm definitely in that second group. I mean, the last 3 years I was traveling so much that I hardly ever got in my studio, and this is like such a relief to be back in here and being able to spend a good chunks of time working on it. I don't miss airports. I was starting to hating flying. But before the virus ever came about, there was just, but George and I were talking about it too, that one thing, we've been outside, we've been out there. So it's really nice to stay home for a while. And I mean, it's got its inconveniences, but we're very blessed as far as that goes. To have a place to work, to have food to eat, and projects.
Absolutely, that's great. Well, we're out of time. It's been about an hour exactly. I don't know if there's anything final you want to impart our students with here.
There is not one thing. Good luck.
Good luck. That's good enough. Thank you, Terry, so much for your time and for taking time out to do this and to talk to our students. I know there's some Q&As that are going to be available, so I know that they may be able to talk to you down the road, or at least have some questions for you.
Look forward to it. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, we'll see you. Hello, sir.
Hi, Paul.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
How are you doing?
Doing good here in Lubbock. Everyone, thank you so much for getting those questions in. Remember, hit that Q&A or put them in the chat. We've got a lot of questions in. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can.
Oh, God.
And so let's, be ready. Let's just jump right in. So first question, it's so difficult to be objective with one's own artwork. What are some ways that you are able to get some distance and see what's really going on in your art? And do you have any advice for other artists about objectivity?
Yeah, I think probably if you're an artist, you've abandoned the idea of objectivity a long time ago. I think it is very much a subjective act, and you try to. I think what you do when you're an artist, you make worlds. Each piece or each body of work is a world that you are making, and you try to make that world be as true to your idea of what the truth of it might be as you can. But I do think that it's always about that piece, because the reality is no matter, even you might make something, but still that doesn't mean you understand it. That doesn't mean you know where it came from. I always like the idea of somebody coming in and looking at a piece and saying something that I never even thought about. as far as what something that I was making. So I think that it's the work is always going to be just what it is. It's going to be what it is, and you can criticize it, you can throw stuff at it, you can praise it, you can buy it, you can sell it, whatever. But it's still just what it is, and so it's its own objectivity, you know.
Absolutely. Randy Gannis asks, how many pieces should you have before you approach a gallery or anyone?
You should have more than one, probably, or have at least one. You know,
Yeah.
or a lot of good ideas, you know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Next question. This one comes from Jordan Martinelli. He says, or she says, what has been your favorite medium to work with in 2020, considering the limitations of quarantine? I know in the talk you talked about how it's been nice to be at home in your studio. So this is a good question of what have you been drawn to?
Well, I've been doing a lot of work, a lot of drawings and works on paper. There's an art store here where that I get paints, and they've been letting me in kind of early, so I can, you know, the days that I need to go stock up, I go, and they've been very generous to me and let me come in and kind of pick and you know, get what I want there. But I think I haven't really confronted the idea of casting anything or going to a foundry or making anything that you know, is going to require going out of my studio and dealing with other people. So I'm sure that's coming. This piece that I'm working on, I'm start doing some sculptural elements, and I'm going to have to go out and buy things. But right now, I'm just, you know, I'm just working on things that are accessible.
This next one is from Chris Taylor, and it starts actually with a statement. So Chris says, thanks so much, Terry, Paul, all the Allens, and everyone who helped make this week possible. I'd add John Opperman and Andy Wilkinson to that list. Bravo. So wonderful and generous. One thing that is so exciting to me of the Allen Collection landing at Texas Tech is helping everyone see the opportunities in the wide horizon, tough grit, and blasted atmosphere of the Llano Estacado. Looking forward to the momentum building from this, Terry, how might the university further leverage the realities of its place or setting to catapult possibilities of creativity, originality, and grace?
I think the more artists that you bring in, guest artists, guest writers, guest poets, guest architects, but have just a really steady flow of people from all divergent kind of areas, doing either workshops, just presentations, whatever. But I think that's really where you learn. You learn from seeing what somebody else is encountering and they're engaged in. And I think that's the most valuable, at least for the arts, for sure. I think it's the most valuable aspect that a school can offer.
One thing that you've talked about with me and in other places, but we didn't necessarily touch on in the conversation. You mentioned it a little bit, but you know, I'll throw it out there. One of the original ideas for the name of the center was the Center for Unlearning.
Yeah, it should be AKA Center for Unlearning at all times, because that's what we call it.
Yes, and that concept is rooted in what you talked about in the conversation of that you don't give credit to any school necessarily, but that idea of unlearning. There's a lot of students out here tonight. I imagine, you know, there's that process of you learn all these things in school, but then sometimes that can be debilitating and you have to unlearn those processes. Can you speak a little bit to more of that idea of unlearning?
Yeah, I think it goes back to habits. It's you're taught certain habits. You're taught them at home. You're taught them at school. You're taught them at church. You're taught them by your peer groups. But you have this I think bank of habits, and when you breach those habits, you're stepping into a mystery zone. And when you're stepping into that mystery zone, you can bring up all kinds of scary things for yourself. But at the same time, that's where the fertile area is. That's where the real, that's where work is. That's where, to me, making art is. I think it is always a process of unlearning. It's a process of building, but it's a process of breaking down also, and investigating things from another angle. I used to think that when you get kind of jammed up and you don't have any ideas and you don't quite know what you're going to do, a good little habit is to go somewhere in your room that you've never been, go lay down, go under the sink, go climb up in the attic or the closet or whatever, but go somewhere that, and just look at the world from another perspective. And so I think it's always about a curiosity of what's on the other side and what you cannot see. And so unlearning I think it's about, not just taking it for granted that only what's in front of you is what's there. It's only maybe less than half of what's actually there, quite a bit less than half.
Shannon McNally, who had some great questions for Bucka last night, and who can be heard on the new album, Just Like Moby Dick, and a few places, beautiful songs, beautiful music. She asks, can you speak about your latest commission? Tell us a little bit about what you're working on now.
I can't really talk about it because I've signed a thing that says I can't talk about it. I hate to say something that lame, but that's the truth.
Hey, it's part of the process.
It has to do with the idea of projecting 2,000 years from now on the idea of Christianity and Jesus Christ. But that's all I'm going to say.
You have a gift for the log line for the elevator pitch. That's very intriguing. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be looking for that whenever they can.
And it's wide open as far as the materials or what I want to do and whatever. So it's a wonderful project.
Awesome. This question comes from Rachel Harmel. She asked, for songwriting, do you have any particular practice that you follow to keep you on your toes? I would imagine it's sort of like a lightning strike for you, but have you found any type of disciplined practice to be helpful, especially when dealing with writer's block or a dry spell of sorts?
I go to my studio every day. I don't play the piano every day, but I look at it every day. And I think about music. I listen to music. And I read. And sooner or later, I think if you're in there, you start thinking about making something. You start, I'll decide to go sit and play something, or I'll go make a drawing or write something in my book or whatever. But I think it's like the old Flannery O'Connor thing, if, when it happens, I want to be there. And so I try to, I'm probably, that's the main thing. If anything, I'm a Nazi with myself. That's it. It's I make myself go to the studio every day.
Todd Wolfson, who family friend and has been here every single night. I think he's asked a question every single night as well. He says, is there one, and he capitalizes one and puts quotes around it, is there one song that you wrote that feels autobiographical?
Part of me wants to say all of them. Another part of me wants to say none of them, So it's, and probably both of those statements are absolutely right on, But the what popped into my head is 30 Years War Waltz, which I wrote as Joe Harvey's 30th birthday present. And now we're during the 58th year war. Same war, same walls.
So there's not going to be a sequel song. There's not going to be a follow up. The 58.
I doubt it. I doubt it.
That's great. Okay, let's see here. So from Larry Namick, I'm sorry if I got that last name wrong, but he asks, which comes first for you, the melody or the lyrics? I'm sure that changes throughout the process.
Yeah, that it's usually at the same time. I usually start humming and will throw in words while I'm humming a melody or whatever, but in most cases, it's the same time. I had the experience of working with David Byrne on his movie True Stories and did a song, and David sent me a tape of him, of the song he wanted me to write the lyrics for. And he had the music, it was all the instruments were playing, but in his voice, where he wanted me to put words, he just did this kind of wild Arabic yodels, like, and so he was using his voice like an instrument, and then filled in the words later, and that's kind of how he writes. But it was very strange to me, so a lot of people approach things different ways, but for me, it's pretty straight ahead. I have a melody, and the words kind of play off of each other and make each other happen.
We keep those questions coming in. We got a few more here. We could, if you want to ask a few more, we can probably get to those. We got about 10 minutes or so left. This one's from John Poach. TTU is so grateful that we have so much of your artwork in the Allen collection available to our students. I'm hoping that once COVID is over, we can get in there to get inspired by your work. Can you talk about a few instances in which you were influenced by seeing art as a student early on? How did you model on that work or get ideas to move forward?
Yeah, I had a great art history teacher in retrospect. I've told this story a lot, but it kind of talks about what happened at the school I went to. There was a teacher, a woman named Mrs. Watson, who had been a nun, and she had been in a cloister in France. She was an American, but she had been cloistered in this nunnery in France. And she'd met Andre Breton, the surrealist, and through him had met all of the surrealists and become very close friends with, especially Breton, and dropped the cloth, came back to the US, came to LA, and was a critic for the old, now defunct LA Examiner paper. She was the art critic. But she taught part-time at Chenard, taught art history 2 or 3 days a week to pick up some extra money. And one day she said, today we're going to talk about the French artist Marcel Duchamp, and we're very fortunate to have Mr. Duchamp here with us to talk about his work. And so she showed, slides of, and he talked about the different things. And none of us knew who this French guy was. We had no clue who he was. But he was having his first museum show in his life at the Pasadena Art Museum. And so after the class, at the end of it, he said, you've been so kind to me and so patient. I'm doing a television interview this afternoon at the museum, and I would like for you to come out there and support me, if you would. So all of us students went out that afternoon, and they had a table set up with a chess board, and the local news guy was playing, kind of mimicking our chess game while he was interviewing me about the opening of the show that night. After it was over, he came up and shook hands with all of the students. And that night, there was a famous photograph taken at that same table where the chessboard was, with he and Eve Babbitts, who was nude, completely nude, sitting playing chess with one another. And so that, at the time I had no idea who Marcel Duchamp was. But because of this woman, Mrs. Watson, anytime those people came through LA or came to the school, or she would invite them to the class. And so we, there was that constant kind of flow of people. And the Pasadena Museum was a great, it was a great place for young artists. Because I know Warhol's first show that I ever saw was there. Jasper Johns, all of these incredible artists that at the time you had no idea particularly how incredible they were, because we were all very naive and just kind of beginning, but you smelled it. I
Yeah.
mean, there was something. And then Man Ray came around all of the time. He lived close to the school, and he liked to shoot the breeze with students. He would come at lunch and sit around and talk to people. So you had these kind of people kind of coming through and talking to you about, and so that was that's why I said that earlier. To me, that's the most beneficial thing that a school can offer, is this, this constant kind of deluge of different possibilities of different people,
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a valuable question from Aaron Robertson. We have people tuning in from all across the country. And so he asked this question: where can we see your work in person? What galleries? And of course, I know you have stuff all over the place. In fact, Liquid Assets is being installed at Texas Tech right now. So there's one on campus at Texas Tech. But what are some other things you have right now going on that people can check out?
Well, there's the Red Reader that's at Texas
That's right.
Tech.
Yep.
And in Lubbock, there's the Stubb Memorial, which is Barbecue Beyond the Grave, which is out on East Broadway. So in Lubbock, my main gallery is in Los Angeles, L.A. Louver Gallery. They have a lot of my work. I have a gallery in Houston, Betty Moody Gallery, that you can see work.
So there you go. There's some good spots for people to check out. If you're around any of those, I highly recommend.
There's a piece at Laguna Gloria Museum called Road Angel, which is a casting of a 1953 Chevy that's it's got like I invited all these different people to put a song in it, and so it's got this wonderful sound system, and it plays about 8 hours, I think, now of program music.
I love that. It's a beautiful piece. Go down there, socially distanced. It's a great piece to go see right now. But yeah, you can just sit and meditate with that one for a long time and soak that one in. It's a gorgeous piece. Jeff Dennis asks, on the Pink and Black song, what was the inspiration for writing a song within a song? Is that something you had seen or heard before, or have seen or heard since?
I never thought about it, I guess, that way. I just thought of it as turning on the radio and something else happened, just like, so inspiration, I guess, is actually doing that.
That's great.
Around and turning on the radio.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ginny Hamilton, she says, thank you, Terry, for being such an inspiration. Her question is, you talked about throwing the rules out. When you write your theater pieces, do you think about the structure of conflict and climax and write with those in mind? Or do you throw that out the window and let the characters show you the way? That's Ginny Lynn and Marfa is who asked
that. I don't think about theater structure. I don't think about that. I think about what I'm trying to do with the piece. And most of my pieces have been Joe Harvey speaking words that I wrote. So in a way, all I've really written are a lot of one-woman plays for that Joe Harvey. But she, fortunately, she's kind of a schizophrenic actress. She can shift characters and become so many different types of people within just a short kind of, a small context that that's opened up a whole way of thinking about writing for me, as far as dealing with characters. And most of them have been biographical. The idea of taking on a biography of my parents in one case, Antonine Artaud with Ghost Ship, character called Bleeder. So they're nearly all focused in that manner. But I don't think in terms of probably how I should think about theater. You
know? Shannon McNally's back with another question. She's got great questions. She needs to, if she ever gives up on the music thing or looks for another career,
yeah, she can just ask questions.
Yes, that's what I do. Somehow I've made that a living, and so I don't know. It can work for you. What part of the world are you most fascinated by its art?
By its art?
Yes.
Mexico jumped in my head.
Makes sense.
You know,
yeah.
And Australia, music-wise, there's a wonderful book called by Bruce Chatwin called Songlines, which is it's a phenomenal book about dreams and songs and how songs are alive and come out of the dirt and come out of the sky and come out of nature. So it's an incredible book. But yeah, you know, it's funny too. I mean, you know, you periodically will hear certain songs coming from some culture. I know the first time I heard Ravi Shankar, I was in a garage in LA painting, and it was a little garage studio that we'd made. And I thought it was some banjo player on acid, you know. I had never heard a sound like that before. So there's Indian music that I love, and I had the opportunity to go to India and play with a number of people that were Indian musicians, and the Thai people I played with. That was a remarkable experience because in Thailand, you know, it's tonal, and so you can like sit in a cafe and you listen to the people behind you speak to each other. It's like they're singing to each other. You know, it's very beautiful. So there's so many and so much richness coming at you from all of these different cultures. I think that it's a hard call, you know, because there's so much beautiful music out there people are making.
Absolutely. I love that. So two more questions. Someone asked, and I think this is interesting. I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, but who's your favorite author?
Oof. God, you know, that's another impossible thing to answer.
Name check a few. What are some of the books that have inspired you in your life and in your career?
Well, you know, Melville inspired me. And then I read the Odyssey and the Iliad not too long ago and realized that like War and Peace, a lot of these books that I've always said that I read and I never read, I just looked at, but I actually now have read them, and you see the kind of roots of everything. All of literature kind of in those books and those stories. The beat writers had a big impact on me when I first read them, and Hemingway had a big impact. Contemporary writers, God, there's a lot of them. I'm reading a book right now called The Glass Hotel by a woman named Emily St. John Mandel, I guess, or Mandel. And she wrote another book called Stations 11, which I really liked. So, you know, it's just like kind of, you ask a question like that and it's like immediately being drowned in a library. Because so many wonderful books and wonderful, you know, incidents that kind of are around books that have happened to you, and inspirations, you know. Like I think one thing I said, I read a lot, mostly in the morning, and I'll read it, and then, you know, one sentence you'll bang, and the next thing you'll write 10 pages based on one little sentence you might have read in a book, you know. So it's a very fertile kind of zone for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna end it with this question, and I think I saved the best for last, or at least the most interesting for last. Corey Van Dyke asks, if you had one piece of advice for Donald Trump, what would it be?
I don't know if you can put this on the, go
We're
fuck
here.
yourself. How's that? You can cut that off if you want.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was live, but yes, we'll maybe in the final upload we might do that. But no, I love that, Corey. Thanks for the question. I think that's a great place to end. Terry, thank you so much. I want to thank all of the Allen family for the past 5 nights. I want to especially thank all of you who have been tuned in, watching, listening, and continuing on with this. We really, really appreciate this. Remember, this was brought to you by the Terry and Joe Harvey Allen Center for Creative Studies. I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned a lot about art, music, life, and learned more about the Allen family. Let's see, what else? I think we want to thank Andy Wilkinson, John Opperman, and Terry. Last words?
Yeah, I would just like to thank everybody too. Thank Texas Tech. Thank the Southwest Collections. Thank you very much, Paul, for what you've put together, and Andy and everybody that's had anything to do with this. It's been a great opportunity for us, and we've really enjoyed it.
A great time. Awesome. Well, we will end it right there. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.